What's good, guys? Fantasy Joe back here with some more fantasy football content. Today, we are doing our top 12 wide receiver rankings. Going to be breaking those players down. Smash that like button if you guys want to see part two. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I've got RB rankings already up on the channel. Got fantasy profiles talking the outlook for a lot of these players already up on the channel. More to come on a lot of players, so you're going to want to subscribe for sure. Let's hop right into it. Okay, our number one receiver, we have Tyreek Hill. Pretty easy why he's our number one. He has dominated for fantasy whenever he's been healthy. If you look at the 2018 season, he finished as the wide receiver 1 overall, and then 2019 missed a few games. But then in 2020, when he played the full season again, finished as wide receiver 2 overall. Really, whenever he's been able to stay healthy, he has dominated for fantasy, and he's got a pretty good track record. So that's why I'm taking him as my number one receiver this year. He still has that strong connection with Patrick Mahomes. Their skill sets complement each other quite well, and he can, finish as a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. We've seen him do this at around 130 something odd targets. He really doesn't need a volume increase, although I think he could get one this year because of the weapons that they have there currently in Kansas City. Outside of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, not a ton of great options. So he gets even maybe more volume this year, which could be great for him, obviously. Moving on to our number 2 receiver, we have Devonta Adams. He finished as wide receiver 1 in 2020. The reason that I have him as a wide receiver 2 really is just if Aaron Rodgers is gone, he's probably my 5th or 6th receiver off the board then at that point. Slides on the board a great deal. But if Rodgers is back, he is my wide receiver 1. He has huge touchdown upside. We saw him catch 18 touchdowns in about 13 and a half games last year. Absolutely dominated for fantasy whenever healthy. He has a chance to be a true difference maker at the wide receiver position when you catch that many touchdowns. That's why I have him ranked so high and why he would be my wide receiver 1, like I said, if Rodgers is back with the pack in 2021. Moving on to wide receiver 3, we've got Stefon Diggs. Diggs finished as the wide receiver 3 in 2020, led the league in receptions and yards. Got an absolute huge target volume in this last season, and he has a strong connection with Josh Allen. Josh Allen looks for him constantly, which is what you want, obviously, if you're drafting a wide receiver high in a draft, is their quarterback to look for him, and they have a huge pass-heavy offense. When they're in even game scripts, they're throwing the ball a ton. Basically, they run the ball through the air. And Diggs is that safety blanket as well as, a downfield threat. And I think when you have as much volume as he had last year, he even has a chance to, catch more touchdowns than he did in this last season, which is exciting for a player who did as well as Diggs did it, finishing as wide receiver 3 overall in 2020. Wide receiver 4, we have Deandre Hopkins. He finished as a wide receiver 5 in 2020 after getting traded to the Arizona Cardinals. So his first season with this team, he was a wide receiver 5. That is a strong selling point for a receiver coming into his second year with the team. He is the target share king, as we've seen. Had basically a 30% target share once again with a new team, which is pretty outstanding, honestly. I rarely see things work that way. And honestly, I think he has maybe even a brighter outlook for this season just because, like I said, it's his year 2 in this offense. He's an ascending young quarterback in Kyler Murray, which could bring more touchdown upside to him. He had 160 targets last year and caught 6 touchdowns, I believe. So you could see that number come up with that type of volume, just like I said for Stefon Diggs. I think both these guys could have double-digit touchdowns or close to it in this upcoming season, certainly within the realm of possibilities for them. So that's why I have him at 4. Moving on to number 5, we have Calvin Ridley. Finished 2020 as the wide receiver 4 overall. And now that the team has left, traded Julio Jones, he is the no doubt wide receiver 1 on the team. Is going to get a ton of volume. We saw the volume that Julio Jones used to get when he was the wide receiver 1 in Atlanta. A lot of that was because he was Julio Jones, but Calvin Ridley is also a very highly talented wide receiver. As evidenced by that wide receiver 4 finish last year when Julio was still on the team for a certain amount of games. But the thing about Calvin Ridley that's so exciting is he has that touchdown upside that Julio lacked. We've seen him already have a bunch of big touchdown seasons. Early in his career, has shown no problem getting in the red zone. Hopefully that Matt Ryan doesn't have some mental block between throwing touchdowns to his number one wide receiver or something, and he can continue that trend in this upcoming season with that volume. He's going to be dynamite for your team in this upcoming season. Wide receiver 6, this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. We have Justin Jefferson. He finished as wide receiver 6 in 2020 as well. The reason that I have him at this point is I think that Justin Jefferson could absolutely break out this year. Obviously, breakout might be too strong of a word. He had a great year last year, 1,400 receiving yards on 124 targets. But the first 2 games of the year, he didn't do a whole lot. The team didn't realize, I don't think, how good he was yet. And then, after that, he just went on an absolute rampage. I think now the team knowing how good he is on a 17-game season, I think there's a chance, he gets 145 targets, something like that this year. Now they know just how good of a player he is. And we saw, a player like Odell Beckham dominate early in his career. I think he could be the next Odell Beckham Jr., where he has monster years in his early years. There's nothing holding this player back. To me, play-wise, he's a faster Keenan Allen. Excellent route runner, ran a 4.4 at the combine. Really, I don't know what else you're looking for as far as wide receivers go in Justin Jefferson. Moving on to number 7, DK Metcalf. Metcalf finished as the wide receiver 7 in 2020. And now you think, he was only in year 2 and finished the wide receiver 7. We've got to be pumping him up even more for this year. I say pull the reins back just a little bit, though, because we've seen a change in the offense for the Seattle Seahawks. They're going more run first in 2021, firing Brian Schottenheimer because he was throwing the ball too much. So I could see the volume coming down, his targets coming down. But if we look at a player like Tyler Lockett that's dominated for fantasy in recent seasons on a low target volume, and his quarterback, who was it? Russell Wilson. I think Russ is going to Russ. He's going to be a highly efficient quarterback no matter what. He's going to get his touchdowns somehow, some way. Even if they throw the ball less, I think the touchdowns are still going to be there. And these players, DK Metcalf, can be very efficient on a few amount of targets. I still don't know if he has, if he's going to be as good as he was the year previously, but I think he can be a very good receiver for your fantasy teams this upcoming season, even with less passing volume in Seattle. Number 8, I have Keenan Allen. He finished as a wide receiver 14 in 2020. Missed a few games, but he was an absolute volume king this year. A lot of guys get great volume, but so if you take out the game that he played, that he was injured in, and you take out the one start that he had without Justin Herbert, his 17-game pace with Herbert would be 192 targets, which is absolutely ludicrous. The guy, if he was getting that much volume and was getting a little bit farther down the field, he'd be even higher up in these rankings. But since he has such a low average, he has a low depth of target usually, which brings down his yards per reception, all that stuff. But when you're getting that much volume, I don't really care. As well as we saw Herbert bring some untapped upside. Herbert was throwing touchdowns to him like crazy last year. I think he had 8 touchdowns or something, which is a good number for Keenan Allen, especially when he missed games. So all of a sudden, if we have a guy like Keenan Allen getting a ton of targets and could be catching ton of touchdowns a season or something like that, I think that's within the realm of possibility. With Justin Herbert, he could be fantastic for fantasy this upcoming season. He's a guy I love to draft. I think he could be absolutely dynamic. I think he's going to be very consistent for you as well with just the amount of volume that he gets every week catching those passes. Even if he doesn't get in the end zone, I think he's still going to be pretty darn good for your fantasy teams. Moving on to wide receiver 9, I've got A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown finished as a wide receiver 11 in 2020, which is extremely impressive considering that he played basically the entire season on 2 hurt knees. Got surgery at the end of the season on both of his knees, and the doctor told him he wasn't even supposed to play last year. He said, "I'm good, though. I'm good, doc. I'm going to go finish as wide receiver 11 and not even, have all the games." He averaged 15.2 fantasy points per game on only 106 targets. Even if Julio Jones comes in and gets more targets than him, A.J. Brown's going to be fantastic for fantasy. I've got no worries about this guy as long as he stays healthy. We see him dominate for fantasy 2 back-to-back years on so few targets. and I think he has a chance, get 125 targets, 130 targets, or something like that in this year, which could take him to that next level for your fantasy teams. Number 10, we've got Terry McLaurin. He's an extremely talented wide receiver. Was very good his rookie season, was very good last season, and had honestly really inconsistent quarterback play. Another thing I want to point out, he was another guy who played injured last season, had 2 high ankle sprains, which are pretty tough to deal with, and he was still able to have 1,100 yards last year. Fitzmagic, his new quarterback, is excellent to have him as your wide receiver, or as your quarterback if you want to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, because he is going to throw that ball to whoever his wide receiver 1 is, whoever he trusts, and that is Terry McLaurin by a mile on this team. He's the best receiver. And I think he has true breakout potential in this year, because I think he could get, with Fitzmagic, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he could have close to 10 targets a game. If he gets 160-something targets, the sky's the limit for this guy. He could be a guy who could have 1,300-plus yards, double-digit touchdowns. Really excited about Terry McLaurin for this upcoming season with Ryan Fitzpatrick. At number 11, we have Allen Robinson. He finished as a wide receiver 12 in 2020, and he another volume king. Volume abounds in the Chicago offense. If your name is Allen Robinson, let's look at some of his targets. In 2019, he had 154 targets, which he converted into 98 receptions. And then this last season, he had 151 targets, which he converted into 102 receptions. The guy gets the rock a ton. QB has never mattered before to him. I don't think it's going to matter this season, whether it's Andy Dalton for a few games and then Justin Fields, or whether Justin Fields gets rolling earlier than we think. I don't really care, honestly. I think he's going to get so much volume, and whoever the quarterback is can't be much worse than Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles last season. So I think he's going to be just fine for your fantasy teams. I'm not scared away of Allen Robinson by any means. I think he's going to have very similar production to last year. And then let's say, Justin Fields turns out to be a star quarterback or something like that. Could be even better. And I think there's a chance, too, Andy Dalton is going to be better than Mitch Trubisky was last year. I think there's a good chance that happens. So either way, could be a quarterback upgrade in Chicago for him, which could be big. Moving on to number 12, we have Amari Cooper. He finished as a wide receiver 16 in 2020. He was still good for fantasy, and basically a worst-case scenario with Dak getting injured so early in the year. A bunch of their offensive line going down. Ben DiNucci was starting for them at certain games at quarterback. They looked awful on offense once Dak went down. Really bad. But like I said, he was still able to finish somehow as a wide receiver 16. Basically the worst-case scenario. And the exciting thing for him is Dak is back. This offensive line is back. They should be able to bounce back in this season. I fully expect them to. And look at this stat. So Dak, if you look at the games that Dak finished, Amari Cooper was on pace for 1,704 yards in those games. That's some upside that people aren't really considering when they're drafting Amari Cooper, I think. I see him going the 4th rounds in tons of drafts. I love to stack running backs and then take Amari Cooper as my number 1 wide receiver because I have a ton of faith in him. I have a ton of faith in this Cowboys offense and Dak Prescott returning. And them getting back to their old ways with that crappy defense of having to just chuck the rock a bunch and rack up a ton of yards. If you guys have made it to this point in the video, please, please, please hit that like button, hit subscribe, and if you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section down below. Let me know who you think I should have put in my top 12 rankings, and hit that like button, support the video, leave comments, stuff like that, and I will bring you part 2. This is Fantasy Joe, signing off. See you guys next time.